Hi everyone. So today we are going to go through Unit 3.2. So that's Year 3, Unit 2. And the topic is reimagining the transport system. And what we've done here is we have a big unit. You'll see there's a lot of slides, but what we've tried to do is offer you a very full picture of the transport system as it is, and the transport system as it could be, and lots of space for exploration of case studies of different pieces. It is totally up to you how much of each activity you pick and choose. So we haven't split it into weeks in the way that we usually do. This is slightly different because we wanted to give the flexibility to you to choose how long you wanted this unit to be, um, and what you thought might be interesting to your students. It also gives the opportunity for, as you're going on along, for students to ask questions and then you to change and go, do you know what, we're going to cover electric vehicles. I was going to cover something else, but now we're going to cover electric vehicles because that's what students are interested in, for example. We have a lot of case studies of examples of different ways of doing transport in a sustainable way from across the world. You can use as many of them or as little of them as you want. There's lots of opportunities for discussion, and we've left it quite flexible as well to your teaching style, to how you do the discussion with your students. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring you through all the activities. You'll see they're obviously on the teacher activity outline with a lot of detail. They're in the outline table with a little bit less detail. So hopefully it will support you to run this unit with your students. So the very first piece is, I'll actually slideshow this. So the very first, it's called Reimagining Transport. Oh, and just before we start as well, it's really geared towards your students kind of becoming like town planners. So thinking about their local area, thinking about their community, and the options that are accessible or inaccessible to them in terms of more sustainable transport or transport in general. And we're trying to err away from shaming students for, not taking the bus or cycling or whatever, because it really might not be accessible to them for very many reasons. Whether that's, they live in rural Ireland and there is no bus, or it's too expensive, or they're in a wheelchair, whatever it might be. We don't want to shame students for not taking sustainable transport, but we want to support them to identify why their town, their village, their area isn't built in a way that supports them to use more sustainable transport. Who are people in power who can change that, and what they would like to see in their own communities around sustainable transport. So that's kind of what the whole piece is gearing them towards. So at the end, they'll do a little project on, what our community could look like with sustainable transport and what would need to be put in place to help that happen. You can make that action as small or as big as you like. It can be just, one class, half a class where they think and brainstorm and do some drawings. It can be, 4 weeks that contributes to their CBA, where they, go do surveys and they go to their, local government and write letters and say, we want more bike lanes, or they go to the school and they say, we want bike parking in the school, or yeah, so it can be as small or as big as you want. And if you want support with making it big, we're very, very happy to chat to you. Okay, so the very, very start, we have just a vocabulary refresher quiz, and that's on emissions, because there's quite a lot of talk about emissions in this unit. And so it's just a basic, I'm not going to read out the questions. There's questions, you can put them in quiz teams or whatever. Questions about sectors, and then there's answers. So they should know most of these, but it's just giving them the chance to refresh. On the greenhouse gases, if you feel like your students really aren't clued up on the greenhouse gases and you think they'd like to be more clued up, and like where they come from, because I guess that's important for understanding why any sector, and we're talking about the transport sector here, is polluting. We need to know, well, why does it happen, and like what are the greenhouse gases and why are those polluting? and oil is burnt and creates CO2 or whatever, and nitrous oxide. There is a link to a really good resource from NASA where they have like little superheroes who can be who tell you what are the different greenhouse gases and where do they come from naturally and where do they come from in a man-made way. Okay, then the next piece is on emissions in Ireland in 2022. So, and these kind of recommend that you just go through this one with your students. So it just looks at the 2022 emissions broken down. This is from the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. You may need to change these if new ones come out for 2023 by the time you do it, or in the next few years. The EPA put out these stats every year, so you may need to change it, or you may want to look at the trends. So copy and paste to look at have emissions gone down, or have the sector, there's obviously a percentage. So how are the sectors doing in relation to each other? This graph is the EU emissions about Ireland, and it's just an interesting one to look at. This is from 2021. But as you can see, per capita, per person, Ireland is the third highest. So that can answer some questions about, is it worth us bothering? We've got very high emissions per person. And what's also interesting here is our amount of CO2 is quite high proportionately. Our amount of methane is the highest in Europe proportionately. And our amount of nitrous oxide is the highest in Europe proportionally, and that's due to our agricultural industry. And we don't have fluorinated gases, and that's because we don't really have heavy industry in Ireland. So we've got, a very strong agricultural industry, but we don't have more heavy industry. So that's a conversation that you can have with your students. And yeah, so just looking at that. And just in general, that we're well behind schedule on reducing our emissions. We're not doing well. And you can have a bit of a discussion about that. So that's just an overview of where we're at with emissions in Ireland as of 2021-22. It's the latest data as of the end of 2022 or 2023. So then we have a bit of introduction to the transport sector. We talk about what is the transport sector, and then we go into the transport sector and me. So this is where you are encouraging your students to actually think about, firstly, for them, what is the transport sector for them? What does that mean for them in their day-to-day lives before we take it broader? So the first thing you're asking them to do is draw a map of all the different journeys they might make in a normal week. So that, home to school is probably the one that's going to be most common for them all. But what are the different journeys? And then you're asking them to choose one of those trips and saying, how do you usually travel? And it might be easy to just say, let's all choose our journey to school, so you have a common journey, but it's up to you. So you're asking them to list, how do they usually travel? And it's fine if, they either travel by bus or by car, depending, they can list out a few. And then what we're trying to do with this piece is we're trying to figure out, if there are sustainable or other transport options available that they don't take, why don't they take them? So it might be that it's too expensive. As we said before, it might be that it's inaccessible. So we're identifying what's already there that they don't take. And then we're trying to identify what options don't exist that they would like. So for instance, I'd like to be able to cycle, but there's no cycle lane. So it's too dangerous. So it's just not possible for me to cycle. So we're trying to identify, what options don't actually exist, and trying to figure out why don't they exist, or why can't the students take them. And then finally, you're trying to identify for them, is there something that might be better if they could take these other options that they haven't, that they've identified that they don't take? So might they feel healthier? Might they be getting fresh air? Might it mean that their trip is faster because they're not stuck in traffic? What are the different things that might be better for them? It might be nothing, but it's just trying to explore that. Then you're going to make a class chart. So you're going to ask everyone to contribute what are the transport they wish they could use and why they can't. So if you make a class chart, and basically you're going to keep that chart safe, and you're going to come back to it at the end of the unit when you're trying to figure out what action are you going to take. So essentially, this is the piece where you're doing a bit of mapping, you're doing a bit of understanding about our community. Then we're going to do loads and loads and loads of understanding about the transport sector in general. And then using that information, we're going to come back at the end and think about, okay, so this was the transport we wished we could use. This is why we can't. Is there anything that we've learned that we can apply to figure out how we can make this transport accessible to us. Okay, then we have some facts about the transport sector. So we know that the transport sector is 20%. It's a quick brainstorm that you can do with your students just to kind of see what do they already know about the reason that the transport sector is so polluting. So it's just an open brainstorm. You can do that in whatever way you like. This is just a small piece about how burning oil in our cars and our vehicles produces emissions. These are some general facts from the EPA. Again, you might want to update these about where emissions come from in the transport sector. Another fact about where emissions come from in the transport sector. And with all of these, we do encourage you to explore them, really dig into them with your students in whatever way works best for you. Here's another fact about SUVs as the second largest contributor to the increase in carbon emissions from 2010 to 2018. Okay. Then the next section is looking at the next activity. And again, all of these activities are optional. The first few, I think we kind of suggest that you do, and I'll be more clear on which ones are really optional. But if you decide that you don't want to do one because you don't think it's relevant to your students or not useful, that's totally up to you. Transport in Ireland in the recent past. So the reason that we have put this in is that often looking to, how we lived in the past, not in the sense of like, oh, the classic, we need to go back to the Stone Age. But in general, if we look at how we lived in the past, it tended to be less polluting. And there are things that we can learn from that. So what are the ways that we traveled around in the past, and why were they less polluting, and why are we now in more polluting vehicles and things? Like what are the ideas and the values and the technologies and the historical processes that have brought us to this point? So this is just a tip into it to get students kind of thinking about that. So you're just looking at, canals and railways and bikes and stuff from the kind of late 1700s. The first car was only introduced in the end of the 1800s in 1898, so almost the 1900s. This is a video of, so just be careful, this video will start to play immediately when you go into the slide, and it shows the reduction in railways in the 1900s. And you can have a conversation about cars were introduced and railways were decreased, and what's that about? I've linked a good video. I have a whole list of resources for you, and I've linked an interesting video about the rise of the car in the US and how car manufacturers were part of a push to decrease the railway systems in the US. So it's just kind of starting a discussion about, cars were introduced. Why do we have, like right now, there's not a lot of railways in Ireland. How does that make you feel? Are you connected? Are you able, as a young person who can't drive, to get around places? Why do you think that the railways were increased? And there's lots of different reasons, and we don't have necessarily answers right here. But it's about just having a discussion and feeling like, what does that make you feel that all the railways were decreased? Do you think that they should be increased again? Do you think that cars should be more important? So now we're moving on to other impacts of the transport sector. And what we're looking at here is things like health and safety and use of space. So again, you can go through all of these impacts, or you could explore one or two, or you could just not use all the resources that we've offered and just tip into each one. It's totally up to you. So you're looking at, asking the students, what are these things showing us of that different modes of transport and the way the polluting transport systems that we have, what other negative impacts do they have apart from just emissions? So you're getting to think about how pollution and emissions from transport might be linked to health. So this is just one fact that 4 million children across the world develop asthma every year as a result of air pollution from vehicles. And there's a lot of stats to link transport emissions to health impacts. And what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to just support students to think outside pure emissions, because often when you just think of pure emissions, it can seem quite abstract. It can seem like, how does that make a difference to me in my life right now? Climate change is so far away. But when we can bring it back to the local, to the impact on our bodies, then it can seem more tangible that, yes, it's a good idea to move to more sustainable transport. Yes, because it's good for the environment, but also and the climate, but also because it's really good for me and my family and my community. So trying to make those links. This is a nice video about school children in the UK who measured pollution from transport on their way to and from school, which might be a nice thing to watch. This is, now we're moving on to safety. So that was health, we're moving on to safety. This is what we suggested to do a spectrum line debate on whether students feel safe on the road, and just have a discussion about it. And here's another debate that you could have. Do you think our streets should be designed for people or for cars? This is an image about, so that was about safety. This one's about the use of public space. And, with the safety one, you could go and you could find, impacts of collisions in Ireland if you wanted to dig deeper into it. There's lots of other spaces that, we do encourage you, if things start to come up in class, go with it, find out more impacts, do more research with your students, allow them to kind of take it wherever they want, and then you can bring them back as well. So we're really trying to not restrict you to just what we're saying here. We're trying to allow you to have a little bit of information and then take it whatever way you want to go or your students are interested in. So yeah, so this bit is about the use of space. So in our current transport system, we mostly rely on cars. And is that an efficient way of moving people around is the question. And what could we use the space for otherwise if we didn't have roads just chock full of cars, and roads being the main space usage in our cities and our towns and also our countryside. So yeah, this is just an image showing the different ways that we can use space. And then, change the slide. So then this is just a table with the length and the width and the amount of passengers that 3 different forms of transport can take. And we encourage you to do a fun activity where you maybe go outside or you do it in your classroom and you measure it out. And you go, okay, well, cars can carry this much, buses can carry this much, intercity trains can carry this much. And just ask students, like, do you think that's fine? Do you think it's good? Like, we're not trying to have a big, shove a particular idea down their throat. We're just trying to have a conversation, a visual conversation around the different uses of space by different forms of transport. Yeah. Then we're just thinking about a world with more public transport. Might the streets be used differently if there was a world without more public transport? Here are some images from across the world where streets have been redesigned in cities, or there's been like car-free days, and the different ways that the streets are used. Again, have a conversation around it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it better if we're just moving cars through cities? Do we need public space? Questions like that. Okay, then the next section is about electric cars. This is a bit more technical, but I guess it is kind of crucial in this conversation about transport. Do we just go from electric, diesel and petrol cars to electric cars? So, yeah, this is our first question. Should we swap all petrol and diesel cars for electric cars? It's a video about how electric cars work. Might be interesting to your students, might not.
Ever wondered how EVs get from A to B? Is it essentially?
And then we kind of have a pros and cons of electric cars. So we've got, what's good. They're zero emissions, and they help people get around in a sustainable way. Most of the batteries can be recycled. We already have the infrastructure. If the electricity that they are being supplied with is renewable, then it's like super, super sustainable. And also there's not I don't know if you've heard of tailpipe emissions, but when we talk about tailpipe emissions, it's the pipe at the back of your car. And what comes out of that tends to be not just CO2, but there's also nitrous oxide and there's other pollutants which lead to the health impacts that we spoke about before. So that doesn't happen in electric cars because they don't have a tailpipe. But what is not so good about electric cars, which you might have heard about before, is about the mining for lithium, gold, copper, and other minerals, the batteries. And there's been widely documented human rights abuses, child labor abuses, environmental harm that mines do. There's still fine particulate matter that can come from tires. So there's actually a huge amount of pollution and fine particulate matter that can cause respiratory illnesses that come from just tires on the road. And that's with all types of cars, electric or non-electric. And of course, they're cars, so they still create issues like traffic jams, crashes, all those kind of pieces. We're going to go in a bit about the mining. I think one of the arguments about mining is that fossil fuel cars also require mining of oil and coal and gas, and those environmental impacts are certainly still there. The climate change impacts are still there. There tends to be, and they still require, mining for steel and all the other materials that are used in the car. Lithium, gold, copper, and other minerals, cobalt, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, are very bad for human rights abuses. And the conversation tends to be quite polarized around, well, the human rights abuses are terrible, therefore electric cars are bad. It's not a very nuanced discussion. It doesn't help very much because, that just staying with fossil fuel cars isn't a solution. So the next piece is just trying to tease out that a little bit. So these are a few videos. So this first video is about how lithium is mined, which is the main thing in the batteries. And it talks a little bit about I've only done the first, it's a bit old, and it talks about Bolivia's policy at the end. So I've just cut that bit, it'll stop automatically, but it just talks about the effects that the local people are afraid of, the effects on the environment, the effects on jobs, the effects on health in Bolivia. And we're going to stop that playing. And then what we've offered you, there's lots and lots of videos online about the impacts in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you want to get into that, absolutely go into it with your students. What we are offering you here is some stuff about mining in Ireland, because Ireland is heavily zoned for mining, which I guess means that companies have been given permission to prospect for minerals, to go look for minerals. So 28% of the Republic of Ireland and 25% of Northern Ireland have prospecting licenses for mining. And there's groups all across the country who are campaigning against this because the mines are in their local areas. And some of them have called Ireland like a green sacrifice zone for mining, that the government are giving out these licenses, and Ireland could be kind of sacrificed, the land in Ireland could be sacrificed for mining for these minerals. And most of these companies will say that they have to do this mining because it is really important for renewable energy. And lots of these groups have pushed back and say, no, I don't think it's that important. Yes, we need some minerals, but how much minerals do we need? Why do we need this huge expansion of mines across the world? So we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's kind of nice to kind of keep it linked to local. There are two maps. So Mining Ireland is a website which has all information about mining in Ireland. There's two maps where you can look at, you can bring your students in and you can look at, so this one is about the different licenses in Ireland. So you can see there's licenses all over the country. So if you click on one, you can see, here in the Midlands, it's open. You can look at information about it. This one's open. There's exploration incentives, so they want people to go explore there. But this one's retired. So this one was, so not every single dot here is a mine that might be opened, but this is a license that was there and it was either never used or the mine was opened and retired. So it's interesting to go in with your students and look at your local area or an area that they care about, an area that they love, and go, is there an open license here for potentially looking for minerals and mining for those in your area? And then this other one looks at the different types of mineral deposits in a particular area. So you can see here, you've got zinc, and I'm not sure what PB is, and there's been no mining there, but it is for sure there. Up here, you can see that there's gold and there's mining occurring there. So you can go through it and you can see that there's coal down here in Ballyphillips, and there was mining, but now it's just the mine is disused. So it's really interesting, and it kind of links your students into kind of the reality, not looking too far away, but looking at, wow, what might that look for my area, or is there a mine in my area? Are there impacts? And I've linked some articles about the impacts of that current mines have in Ireland, because we're one of the largest exporters of zinc in Europe, from zinc mines. So can have a bit of a play with that. And this is just a campaign of people in the Sperrin Mountains in Tyrone, who are fighting a company called Daldrian, who want to mine their area and build for gold. And also in the mine, there's copper and silver, and gold and silver and copper are small components of batteries for renewable energy, but also for many other things, as we know. And they're really pushing the renewable energy angle for sure. And these people, and what they also want to do is create a big factory there, processing plant, which would put cyanide, which we know is a poison, a huge amount of cyanide, and they say it's all going to be very safe. But we know that groundwater can be really affected by mining, and so there's lots of risks involved. And the local people are saying, no, we don't want your gold mine here. We don't want you digging in and finding gold, taking it out. We don't know what the effects are going to be. This is a beautiful area. You know, you don't have to do this. So what I have here is, here's a blurb from they have a crowdfunder at the moment for legal aid to fight the company. So you can read that with your students. This is a video from the company to the local people about jobs in the area. It's very nice and slick. And this is a video, there's a lot of these videos on the Save Our Sperrins YouTube page from different people in the area. This is just one from Cathal Keenan, who is a local farmer who has had death threats and been assaulted and stuff since he has been fighting this mine. So just looking at him and him talking about the cyanide, and that he went to go for a job, and then he met someone who said, yeah, we're going to be using cyanide to, clean the gold. And he just said, wow, that's crazy. I'm going to do a lot of research. And then they formed the local group. So it's just interesting to see kind of local, ordinary people fighting things like this. Well, we don't want to hear from you right now, Cathal. However, this is where things get a bit tricky, because if we say no to mines here, our mines going to open in other places. There's an increased demand for electricity and renewable energy and electric vehicles across the world. So what do? Do we export it to other countries where there's less care for human rights, there's less care for environmental destruction or protection? So what this is, it's a real tricky conundrum. If we do keep increasing the demand for electric vehicles, we will have to open a lot more mines across the world. So is there a way that we can protect communities and the environment from mining and move to zero emissions transport? So this is a paper. It might be, I've linked the paper. You might want to explore it with your students, but it's a really important paper that came out last year, I think, for this. It's not usual that we would link something complex like this, but I think it's quite important. So it might be something that you differentiate with your students. It might be something that you just have a conversation around. But I think if this topic comes up, even if you don't show them these slides, for you to have this information is really useful and important. So this looks at the US, but it's really applicable for across the world. It's called More Mobility, Less Mining. Can we do this? Can we have people moving around in a sustainable way without increasing mining? They say yes. They say the key thing is reducing the demand for electric vehicles. So reducing our need for cars, so we don't have, one for one. So we don't have to create one car for every car that fossil fuel car that we decommission, because that means that we have to mine a lot more of these minerals to create individual batteries. However, if we are moving to more public transport, so one big bus, again, you were looking earlier, that activity with your students where you see how much can one bus transport versus 5 cars or whatever. One bus needs one slightly bigger battery, but only one, for moving much more people. And of course, things like bikes and walking and electric bikes and electric scooters need much, much smaller batteries. The other thing is that, again, reducing the size of the batteries needed. So we're seeing huge, huge, huge electric SUVs. Do they need to be that big? There's lots of new technology coming on that says they don't need to be that big. So why are we moving towards these very big electric cars? Can we have much smaller cars and like less and smaller cars and lower small battery models like bikes and scooters and things like that, and walking. And using the big batteries where you're moving a lot of people. So I guess it's proportional, how the size of the battery proportional to the amount of people being moved. Making sure that much of the minerals as possible are recycled and can be recycled. So really setting up facilities which say that, you know, these can just be once you've mined that lithium, that battery can be recycled multiple times and into multiple vehicles. And finally, making sure that there's an increase in human rights regulations in the mines that are already existing. It's tricky because often these regulations are set by the countries or the companies and not international law and international companies. You know, we see it with fast fashion companies that when they're self-regulating, it doesn't really work. So that one's a bit trickier, but it definitely should be taken into account. And there are things in the EU which are trying to push that forward. So you could go explore that as well if you wanted to. Okay, so then here's a case study that it's a really nice case study to explore with your students if they were maybe particularly interested in the ideas of what you could do with public space or safety around cars. Because it looks at the show Old Enough from Japan, in which little kids, 3-year-olds, just go on errands by themselves. It's a very cute show. It's a really nice, probably little activity you could do with your students where you watch an episode of the show and then you listen to a podcast which explains why the Japanese and how the Japanese road system has been designed in order for kids to be safe rather than the supremacy of cars. So yeah, you just can watch the podcast or watch the show, listen to the podcast together, maybe bring them for a walk while they listen to the podcast, do some mindful coloring, write down some notes, however you want to run that one. It's up to you. It's just a really nice example of exploring. There's different ways of having streets and cities and systems. And it starts from the question of how can 3-year-olds just go off by themselves? Okay, so that's that one. The next one is about car advertising. So we've got this video of electric SUV. You watch it with your students. And then you're just answering these questions, having this conversation, you know, what benefits does the car bring the driver? Why did they make the ad like this? Is the ad realistic? Just trying to do some critical analysis of car ads that we just kind of universally absorb all the time. And what are they telling us about cars? What is this? Oh yeah. Then this is a video I really encourage. I haven't chosen a section because I think the very start is useful. And then there's lots of different examples as you go along. So you could just choose which ones you want to do with your students. And he's a city planner, this guy. And he's just analyzing different car ads across the last few years to show how they use their advertising to ridicule public transport. And to create this idea that public transport is like sweaty and annoying and all these things, but being in a car gives you freedom. So it's just, again, doing this kind of critical analysis of what are we actually getting from advertising around the transport system that we exist within. And then we're looking a bit at campaigns against car advertising. And again, this is about having a conversation with your students around what they think is good and useful. And, you know, really debate this with your students. Don't just present them as the right thing and fact. So these are 2 campaigns. So sorry, I just got someone at the door there. But so what we're looking at here is campaign groups who are campaigning against ads. One is called brandalism, and they just tend to go around to ads and they change them to represent what they think ads should be saying. Another group is called ad-free cities, and they think there just shouldn't be ads in cities at all, which again is an interesting thing to discuss. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? So this is an ad they put up called Not Enough Trees. And these are about campaigns against car advertising that both of these groups have run. So brandalism have put up these kind of new car ads. These ones are also new car ads. And then you could do a bit of campaign analysis with the students about, what are the groups trying to achieve? What's their target? Is it a good campaign? Would they like to do something like this? Then you're looking at this campaign in the UK by Ad-Free Cities, which was against this Toyota ad called Born to Roam. And they actually won the campaign because the advertising stands in the sorry, another person to the door. So we were looking at this campaign against car advertising that talks about or it portrays an image of destroying the environment. And this group, Ad-Free Cities, took a case against Toyota, and they won, and the Advertising Standards Authority of the UK said that that ad had to be banned because of the impact of no regard for the environmental impact of driving. Then you can have a conversation about, advertising and what does it mean? What does regulations around advertising mean? So, on cigarette packets, we have cigarettes causing lung disease and these kind of like images. You've got drink aware. What I haven't done is I haven't put any more obvious images of gambling or drinking or those other areas, because I want to leave that up to you and your sensitivities around talking about those kind of things with students. But you could show images of other advertising standards, such as, where it says drink aware at the bottom of alcohol ads, and at the bottom of gambling ads it says stop when you need to stop. And there's lots of conversations and lots of research into do those work? Do ads with that kind of information work on them? Does it actually stop people drinking, or is it just something that goes over people's heads? This is in Paris, where now French car adverts must say that people should things like consider carpooling or walking and cycling, and move and pollute less. And then this is a kind of debate activity where students choose one of these statements about car advertising, and they then form groups based on the statement that they choose. So everyone who chose a particular statement chooses a group, and then they just have a debate, and you can structure that debate in whatever way you want. But it's just to get students thinking about, it's not necessarily about winning, it's just getting students thinking about the different options for regulating, whether you should regulate at all, car advertising. Okay, then we've got another option of transport in our community. So transport in our community. And this just we have a list in the teacher activity outline of different activities you could do. So it's really about getting outside with your students and doing surveys of the transport people use, maybe looking at pollution from transport by looking at lichen on the trees, doing a map of the infrastructure in the area. There's lots of different options, but really it's just getting your students out into their community and actually mapping and talking to people and trying to understand transport within their community. Then you could look at transport policy in Ireland with your students. So this is just a broad picture of where transport policy comes from. So the Irish government do a climate action plan every year on sustainable, which has a section on sustainable transport that everyone has to abide by. Local authorities, so that's city and county councils, are the body who usually carry out in local areas. So if the government has said, 1,000 bike lanes by the end of 2025, then the local authorities are the people who actually decide where those bike lanes go, how much, who uses them, all those different pieces. And then the National Transport Authority kind of straddles those two. So they do look at the big infrastructure projects and would talk to local councillors about how those things match up together. This is from the 2023 Climate Action Plan. So you're just looking at what are the things that the 2023 Government Climate Action Plan says. And again, have a debate, have a discussion, see what your students think. Do they think it's good, bad, indifferent, etc. Then there is, we suggest that you do a root cause map for transport emissions. So if you've been doing root cause maps all along, you can do them whatever way you usually do them. Here is a bit of a suggestion for transport where you could ask the questions, why do we have so many emissions from transport? Get them to think about that, and then get them to think a bit deeper and go, what is the infrastructure that supports polluting vehicles? Who decides what kind of transport system we have? Who's in charge? Is it companies? Is it governments? Is it individuals? Is it a combination? And what are the ideas that support the polluting transport options? Obviously, if you've done all the different case studies, they'll have a wide variety of different new knowledge to choose from. But also, you don't have to have done all the case studies, and they can just choose from their understanding or do further research. Okay, and then we're into the last section, which is about imagining a different transport sector. So the first piece is just giving them the chance to think very crazy, very wacky, very, just getting their imaginations going so that they don't fall into the groove of just thinking of the same usual ideas. So we're going to use, this comes from design thinking. And what you're just going to do is you're going to tell them, like really encourage them to be super creative, not to second guess themselves. And you're going to give them like 1 to 2 minutes to come up with an alternative to the current transport system that is sustainable and enjoyable. And so the first thing you're going to ask them to do is, do one suggestion that involves music. The next one is something that they can make their commute to school more fun. And the third one is something that involves upcycling something else. And it's just getting them to write down the first idea that comes into their head, maybe the craziest idea that comes into their head. And then you're going to put them in pairs or in a group, and they need to share all their different ideas and try and come up with 3 new ideas. So if one student had, I want to create a piano cycle route so that as we're cycling along, music plays. And another student has said, I want to create a silent disco walk to school. And maybe they could combine it to say, we're going to cycle, and the music that's going to be played is the music that, walkers can also listen to, that goes into walkers' headphones, or, it doesn't matter. It's just about really trying to be as big idea and creative as possible. Then they're going to talk about the values for a better transport system. So this quote just encapsulates what we're trying to think about here. So we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So it's about thinking, what are the values that are in the current transport system, and what values might we like in a new transport system? And the kind of research behind the values that we're suggesting, and you don't have to agree with them, come from a variety of different bodies, but one is the Climate Change Advisory Council, which is the government's an advisory council to the government on climate change. So they've thought about this a lot. So firstly, you're asking them to think, when people were designing our current transport system, what did they think was the most important thing? So trying to figure out the values of our current transport system. And then if we want to shift to a new transport system, we wanted them to think about what are the new values and ideas that they would like. So first of all, you're going to create a checklist, and then here are some other ideas that we suggest. So you can run through them. Again, you can debate them, you can have conversations around them. However you want to, however you want to do that. And then you're going to create a checklist. We've started the checklist here with the ones we've suggested. You add more from your list. And then what we're going to suggest that students do is they take their ideas, crazy ideas that they just come up with, and they look at the checklist and they compare them. And so they say, like, I've come up with this idea, but is it accessible? How could I, if not, how could I make it accessible? So we're trying to help the students bridge this gap between amazing ideas they've come up with, and then thinking, how can I make it align with the values of the sustainable transport system that we want? So for instance, as an example, so my wacky idea is a new bike lane that creates electricity when you cycle on it. and the electricity powers the street lights. And then I look at the list, the checklist, and I don't know if it's accessible to everyone. So I put a question mark, and then I say, well, yeah, okay, so we need to make sure that it's wide enough for wheelchairs and find out more about disabled people's needs. I'm sure it's affordable for everyone, because once you have a bike, it's free. Now, maybe we need to help people get bikes. I don't know if it does as little harm to nature as possible. So I put a suggestion that if we don't cut down trees to make it, it'll do as little harm to nature as possible. So just trying to match up the idea and just getting students to think about the values. Then we have a whole, so they've done some ideation, they've thought about the values. Now they've a whole like 9 case studies from around the world. I'm not going to go through them all. You can look at them yourself. You absolutely do not have to do all of these. You can go through 2 or 3 of them with your class. You could give each small group one and they have to report back and explain it to the class. Whatever way you want to do this, we're just trying to give you a wide breadth of different inspiring case studies from around the world. And what we suggest, the one thing we suggest that you do with this is, as the students are going through them, they do look at their checklist and they tick them off and go, yeah, this hits this, this hits this, this hits this, but actually, to make it accessible, we think that they should do this. So really trying to critically engage with it and link it to that values work that they did. So I'm just going to skip through them all to the very end. And then at the very end, we suggest that, you've looked at all these worldwide case studies and find out, are there any examples in your own community? And that might be as simple as a student saying, yeah, there was a bike lane made last year or whatever, but really trying to, again, bring it back to what's already happening in the community. And then finally, this is the area where they do their project. So they think again about their journeys at the very start. They're going back to what they did at the very start. And they're answering this question, how can our community change to more sustainable ways of transporting things and people? You go back to this chart of the transport they wish they could use and why they can't. And we'd suggest, just for clarity, that you put all the modes of transport in order from most sustainable to least sustainable. So if a student is like, I wish I could travel by helicopter, you might say that's great and really fun, but it's not super sustainable. It is hard to find a comprehensive and one list of most sustainable to least sustainable transport. But if you do a Google, there tends to be pretty strong consensus around, like, things are slightly different types of buses and things like that. But, you tend to go from one individual in a car, not very sustainable, to electric train, extremely sustainable. So, you'll find some information and again, see what they think first, and then ask them to go and research and see, are they right? Why do they think some are most sustainable or least sustainable? Don't just do the research immediately. Get them to try and figure it out themselves first. Then ideally they'll do this in small groups. So they'll choose one group one journey that they'd like to make more sustainable. Then they'll choose one sustainable mode of transport from the list. And then from the list of reasons why students can't use that mode of transport, they'll write those down. So they'll have the journey they want to focus on, the mode of transport they want to focus on, and the reason it's hard currently to use that mode of transport. So I've got an example here. And then they will think about all the ideas, all the case studies, everything they've seen. And they're answering the question, how can you make it easier and more enjoyable to use your chosen mode of sustainable transport on your chosen journey? They want to make sure they're addressing the issues of why people can't use it right now. And then they're just encouraged to draw the route if it was, if their solution actually happened. And you can encourage them to do like really beautiful drawings, and you can stick them up around the school, or it can just be a sketch. Again, it's up to you. And then finally, as always, we suggest that you are going and talking to decision makers. So, what could the school do to help make the idea happy, and what could the local or national government do to help make the idea happen? And again, that could just be identifying it and leaving it, or it could be thinking of a way to actually go talk to those people, present their ideas, ask them to do something about it, engage in conversation. So that's it. I hope that you find it a useful unit.